10 million, 12 million, you know, so it's definitely an economic disaster, and we'll see what happens in LA over the next couple of years when things get rebuilt out. We'll see.
Well, I'm just happy, Dr. Hill, that you are there for selfish reasons, because you are always here at Q&A. How was your Q&A on Monday?
It was pretty good.
What is the one that you do on Monday?
So every Monday on YouTube/Dr. Hill, Dr. Hill, I do a neurofeedback and chill at 6 p.m. Pacific or 9 p.m. Eastern, and hang out for about an hour and usually rant on some particular topic that I think we should, you know, have more perspective on and take more control over, some physiology-focused biohacking, and typically start that with some neurofeedback, and I explain a particular protocol that I'm doing, or I show the process of neurofeedback in real time so folks understand that it's actually not that hard to do neurofeedback. It's kind of hard to know what to do in the process, the training process that we use, but the techniques are not that complicated to set up and execute in a neurofeedback piece of software. So I show people that on Mondays. Yeah.
And it all starts with the EEG, right? Can't do anything without that, the raw data.
It does. No matter the provider, no matter the style or the software, all neurofeedback is training something inside the brain. You know, that's the definition, training signals inside the central nervous system. And most neurofeedback is EEG. Not every EEG neurofeedback provider will use the EEG in an assessment context, and not every assessment is created equal. So we have these things called QEEGs, which are full head resting baselines that are phenotypes or biomarkers or patterns that we tend to, you know, trait markers we carry around. And they're not perfect. This is the problem in neurofeedback and in QEEG and in brain mapping, is the QEEG is valid in terms of like it's stable data. If I did a QEEG or an EEG on you today and one in a month and one in a month after that, it would be the same EEG roughly at a high level. But then QEEG takes that and compares it to the population averages, right? So we look at your brain and what sticks out and is unusual, but guess what? People are weird. So good job, be weird. The point's not necessarily to judge difference from average as a problem when it comes to the EEG. It's to use the ways in which things stick out and how things are unusual to inform a perspective. And then we also use performance testing, like ADHD testing, alongside that to figure it out. Hey, we have a question.
Go.
Hi, is it Haida? Hi, Haida. Hida. I like it. So what is the arousal model in neurofeedback? It's one of the, I would kind of consider it one of the core like schools of thought in neurofeedback in some ways, the arousal model. The idea that we have a mix of brain waves that affect like how active a bit of tissue is. And so you can think about different parts of the cortex will make a combination of alphas to put the tissue into neutral, or betas to put it into gear, or fast betas, high frequency betas to put it into strong gear, or theta to take the brakes off and release it. And then you can look at things like the speed of the brain. So if your alpha waves are running faster, then literally your speed of processing is faster. You're thinking faster. You're retrieving information, handing off information inside your mind quickly. And so these are the arousal phenomena, essentially the regulatory arousal, not sort of sexual arousal, but you can think of arousal in the context of how awake you are, like a thermostat or a tone. And that's where that comes from. But it really is sort of the SMR landscape, sensory motor rhythm, which is one of the core frequencies we use in classic neurofeedback. I would say that at least half the field is still centered around this one frequency. And it's involved with regulatory arousal management, so an inhibitory tone on aspects of action, sleep, etc. So when someone does arousal model neurofeedback, they probably do a QEEG, and they probably do multiple band training and try to tune different bits of tissue into directions you want, under the idea that we have these, you know, patterns we can go after and resources we can help. And then you'll often see that model, that arousal model, heavily adopted by people that work in the autism landscape, because there's a developmental kind of perspective to it as well, because you can kind of take one kid who's got a lot of developmental difficulties, and based on a bunch of factors in their EEG, your kind of age pegging them a little differently than they are and saying, okay, this 7-year-old without language and these tissues, this tissue is working differently. You try to create a developmental change in that tissue through the same model. So that's the long-winded answer, but thank you for asking.
And we owe that to the Othmers?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, to some extent we do. The SMR stuff, of course, comes from Dr. Barry Sturman, who first sort of demonstrated that this reinforcement of SMR, sensory motor rhythm, creates a inhibitory response that allows brains to resist seizure. And from there, we discovered that SMR is also heavily involved with sleep. It's called the sleep spindle. If you're asleep, it keeps you asleep. And the fact that SMR is a sleep phenomena and a anti-seizure phenomena and a sitting still phenomena sort of created that core arousal. The Othmers were heavily involved from a business perspective and an evangelism perspective and a deep care for lots and lots of people, an education perspective in the original, in some ways, commercialization as neurofeedback started to take hold. And I think the 80s really is when they got into it. I forget exactly when. It was before my time. And maybe the 90s. And they used a 3-band SMR focused arousal model, and the software had a different name at the time. Now it's called Eager. It's the same software that a lot of the field uses now. It was called, I think, neurocybernetics before. When I first got involved in the field, to give you guys some sense of how long ago it was, you need 2 computers to run that software, and they were connected by a parallel cable, and one ran the game and one ran the signals, and you kind of had to have them talk to each other. But the Othmers then changed. Sue Othmer was finding that working lower and lower in frequencies was working for certain populations of people, especially those with strong developmental over-arousal. The over-aroused nervous system is that autistic kid who's screaming and stimming and can't self-regulate. It's an dysregulated, over-aroused nervous system. So Sue was finding that as she went to lower and lower frequency, she was getting some good response across that complaint and also across, I think, a trauma landscape. Trauma-informed therapists were starting to get good results following, chasing subjective experience, because Sue had this process. She was never really super focused on QEEGs and would do an awful lot of, and again, this is very true of the arousal model therapist and provider, of which I sort of am one as well. I was trained in this landscape and still mostly work in this landscape. But you tune. So one person's SMR frequency is not the next person, and how you adjust it is in response to what they notice when training. So if you train someone's, you train someone's C4 SMR at 11.5 hertz and they don't sleep very well, you might go up to 12 hertz and get a better sleep effect. And so you learn to watch effects, these arousal effects or regulatory effects of sleep, stress, and attention in response to these features. So Sue was doing this. She was adjusting and tweaking and moving down, and was finding really good effects with certain populations, and to the point where she was getting below 1 hertz. And the amplifiers they were using were having trouble resolving the signals well. So Siegfried Othmer did some engineering and helped, did a couple of iterations, and the called NeuroAmp, I think, ended up having a lower and lower floor for coupling until the point where they can get down to like 0.0001 hertz, very long, slow waves. And so at that point, the Othmers moved much more into that direction. They created some new software. There's a part of the story I skipped where the software they had been using, they sold to a different neurofeedback company that was trying to sort of take a big play, try and make it large. And that company ended up folding a couple of years later. And so the software reverted back to Howard Lightstone's ownership. And then he relaunched it under the name Eager, from the company Eager. And so that's what we have now, still as a nice backbone for the field. But the Othmers released Signet with a C, baby swan. And Signet is infralow or infraslow. I always get it confused, which is which. Mark Smith has infralow or infraslow as well. And there's a few different people working in that landscape, and it's not the same thing, but there's also regulatory components in that frequency range in the slow cortical potential, the sort of DC shift of the brain as well. So there's several people working below 1 hertz You can look at Niels Bierbaumer's work for slow cortical potential, especially. Those are also arousal model, and you'll find a lot of trauma-informed therapists do these infra-low and for slow because they do, or they can still the nervous system pretty quickly.
So what allows the off-mirrors to train that low? Is it software or is the hardware different? Because doing ILF with the quiz doesn't feel as good as with NeuroAmp 2.
Yeah, the Q-Wiz does resolve frequencies pretty low. It is a DC coupled amp if you use it in DC coupled mode. So there's a couple tricks to get an ILF or an ISL effect that's really solid with a Q-Wiz, with a pocket aerobics amp. And I believe this is true of the 4-channel U-Wiz. I think the 4-channel U-Wiz is the same amp, just repackaged. For anyone who's looking for a Q-Wiz, you'll find I think they're mostly discontinued, and they've replaced it with a very small, like a small form factor. Here's the Q-Wiz for folks that are wondering. It looks like this, and there's one that's half this size with most of the same ports, the same 4-channel setup, called the U-Wiz. And I believe the same innards, where I forget what the lower end is. It's pretty low. And the big complaint or the big problem with doing infra low or infra slow with this hardware is generally the software side. You know, a lot of people are using BioExplorer, for instance, for doing the Wiz amplifiers. And the BioExplorer software stack only gets down to, I think, 0.3 hertz before you just can't resolve it through the software tools that are built into the filtering, essentially. So you have to a little bit roll your own, and a lot of people will take BioEra, which is kind of like a non-user-friendly version of BioExplorer. It's more powerful but less configured out of the box. And people will configure their own software essentially using BioEra, and that's what Signet was initially. It was a version of BioEra with another skin on top of it, heavily configured, running on NeuroAmp. So there's nothing really in the way of using the Q-Wiz that way, but you'd have to kind of configure your own stack, because BioExplorer is not going to work. And, you know, I'm not sure how your filtering is below that half a hertz range, where a lot of software will just not think about frequencies. You also must use silver chloride electrodes on the amp. You have to use a DC coupled electrode. If you use a flat silver electrode, then you can never send, then there's something called I forget, it's an electrical potential, voltage potential. And what's happening is you're getting fluctuating voltages and at the scalp, and an electrode is measuring that fluctuating electrode, the electrical difference. If it's a pasted electrode and a silver tin electrode or gold electrode, then the electrical fluctuating signal is always on the outside of the scalp. It can't go in. There's too much resistance with that kind of electrode. But if you have a sintered silver chloride and you have a driven right leg, ground, which the Wizes do, then you can get down into the DC coupled level, essentially to 0, or like the NeuroAmp 2, 0.00001. But you're going to have software that's good at filtering at that level, that's stabilizing signals at that level. And it may not be quite as focused on that task as the NeuroAmp amps are. And so you might be better off just getting a Signet system, getting trained to use it by by Siegfried's team, if you want to use that system in that style. Or, Eager just added a module. I haven't tried it yet. I haven't been trained in it, but Eager has a sub-hertz module now built into it that they've launched. So, they were late to the party for the infra slow, but you can get below 1 hertz now using Eager software if you're an Eager user, and you've been wondering about the below 1 hertz stuff. You can do it now. So.
Gamification, we've talked about this in the past. I don't think you're a fan. You don't like Zucor, or you have other things?
I use Zucor. No, I like Zucor. Yeah, I sell
Okay.
Zucor. I like it. People like it. What I don't think is, what I don't like is an emphasis on the reward feedback, the style. I don't think it matters that much. And so I think games matter a lot when someone's really bored, or won't sit still, or has some other reason where they want a game. Like I have adults that are like, I can't look at a maze of pictures or Pac-Man. What else you got? I'm like, oh, I have their software package. Now Zucor is somewhat expensive, so it costs several $100s to buy a license of it. So it has to be a good reason for it, not just like I'm a little bit bored at the 4 or 5 or 6 games that I have that work fine. I mean, when you feel neurofeedback, whether you're excited to train, you get effects. You could ignore it, you get effects. So sitting there and staring at it and trying to make things happen, and that expectation aspect of reward learning is not necessary for this flavor of instrumental conditioning because it's involuntary. So you don't need the expectation. It doesn't really do much as far as I can tell. And therefore the games can be kind of discrete and boring, and maybe the information gets in a bit more cleanly. I have observed with some pieces of reward software or reward environments where if you load things up too heavily, you seem to get reduced impacts from the same protocols. And I really do think that it's true that if you use video feedback, you can risk blunting reward or the impact of neurofeedback very easily. And I've seen it happen again and again and again. I don't know why exactly, but my big theory is that, neurofeedback is bound by, it requires the resources of implicit learning. You got to your brain extracts rules from patterns. It's implicit learning. Social information loads up implicit learning tissues with processing and floods them, and you can't do background math implicit learning. So you can't extract the information, the feedback event. So here's the thing. I know what's happening in neurofeedback. I know what the brain's doing after a beep. And it's really responding to the specific applause, to the specific change it just made. And if you have lots of really, really interesting social things, I'm afraid that effect might be abolished. I haven't tested this, but there is research showing that social loading will abolish implicit learning. So I think it's a little bit risky to use videos unless that's the only way the kid will sit still, and then you're getting some training in. Versus
Some movies, no.
I don't like movies. I mean, I offer them every so often. It could be when I have to, when that's the only way. You have a kid who has some significant autism who will watch that one movie 75 times in a row, but won't sit still for anything else. Guess what we're doing? We're watching that movie 75 times in a row, because that's going to get the training in. And if it's only 70% as effective, it's still 100% more than not getting the training in. So
did you ever use that as a selling point? I see a lot of clinics, including my own.
That you can watch movies and train your brain?
Yeah.
I've never used that as a selling point. No, not once. My selling point starts before neurofeedback. It's more like, oh, you want to understand your brain? Yeah, I'm going to teach you to understand your brain. I'm going to make you your own expert in you by looking at data and telling you things and showing you how it paints out. And you're going to say, oh my gosh, yes, that's me. When you're doing brain mapping properly, it's not mysterious. You're like, oh my God, yeah, I had no idea you could see that. So,
got to order for the kitchen. Let's see.
Radar?
What the heck is beta reset? What is it used for? What does it do?
Beta reset was invented, discovered, much with the right languages, by Jacqueline Ginsburg and I'm forgetting her business partner's name. And I think in Arizona initially. I was trained by them to do it at UCLA years ago, like 2006 or 7. It's a 2-channel bilateral low on the head protocol. I think it's at PO3 and PO4 and IO1 and IO2, meaning you're on either side of the inion at the same level as the inion, but you're also in line with like the P3, P4, front to back. So it's like a bracket like this in the back of the head, essentially. And if you have a copy of Eager, and you can open it up, and there actually is a beta reset custom session plan you can load that's actually included by default, and it runs through, I'm going to say it's like 15 or 16 or 17 different little short segments. It starts off at a 3-minute segment, and then it goes into 90-minute segments, and it rotates through. And what it's doing is it's sweeping down and then back up through the beta, and it goes up pretty high. And often the theory is, and people do notice this, there's like a sense of like release, or like a sense of like a physical sense almost that happens during it. So people use it for a bunch of stuff. I use it here and there. I have a few clients for whom we've tried it and they enjoy it. The people that developed it will say that it's useful for body-based things. They've used it for physical injuries in the body. They used it for cerebral palsy with limb wasting. They've used it for Parkinsonian phenomena, like deep brain phenomena. And there does seem to be some other effect. It's not the same as band training. It creates a different impact. And it's probably doing something that's, really around the disrupting hypercoherence kind of landscape at the very least, the reset aspects while it sweeps through and sweeps back up. That's going to really disrupt hypercoherence when you have that particular phenomena. And since the back of the brain is the outside world, including the body, it makes some sense we get body-based phenomena, but it's not a well understood protocol. It's more like a recipe book that, like many things in the field, that we kind of get some effects from, and they're kind of predictable, but it's a little bit of a protocol that's hard to explain what's happening in that one. Yeah.
Order up. How important is it during training to engage with the feedback? Like in children with autism, is it hard to have them engaged? Is just audio feedback enough while they are playing a game?
Yeah, you don't need any engagement whatsoever. Literally, people can be in a coma, and it still trains the brain. Margaret Ayers, for years, at the her last part of her career, she would go to coma bedsides and train brains to be more resilient, reduce seizures, that kind of thing. So no, it's an involuntary process mostly, and it was discovered on cats. Cats are really bad instruction followers, right? So it's not this voluntary expectation. It's more like a passive reward, but the brain's getting applause contingent on what it just did. So it has to do a particular thing, and then that gets applauded, sort of outlined or reinforced. So as far as I know, it doesn't require any real focus. Auditory training works almost as well as multimodal training, is my take. So I do train mostly with visual and auditory, and a big effect is the auditory component. Like, I'd rather train just auditory. That works okay. I wouldn't want to train just visual. And if somebody, for instance, was, thoroughly deaf, I would use a tactile strip to get a tactile response to make up for the lack of auditory if we could. So I think a multimodal response is useful, but the auditory is powerful. And I have trained autistic kids that were deaf and blind, and they would have a rumbly little teddy bear in their lap that would just vibrate, purely that one stimulus. And that also works for things like seizure reduction and some other sleep issues. So I don't think it's necessary to focus or try. And I have a ton of, historically over the decades, I've had plenty of teenagers in my office who, like, in spite of what they were told, would sit there on their phone and ignore it and, like, not pay attention. And it works fine for them too. Some of them are CEOs that are 50, some of that type, who don't do what I tell them and just do whatever they want to do while they're doing training. Still works. So, on email, on the phone the whole time, and that should like get in the way. It doesn't really. I mean, maybe they get a little extra effect by sitting in quietly and watching it, but it's not very much as far as I can tell.
So what is like the step-by-step when somebody comes in? I mean, I don't want to start with autism, but that you have a parent and a child, and I know you're doing a lot of your stuff remotely, but you're looking to get some type of buy-in or commitment early, so they'll continue the process, because it's many sessions. How do you start them out to show them that, hey, you know what, you do have control over this? Is it the temperature, or what? What do you do?
I don't do any peripheral biofeedback or any sort of like voluntary biofeedback. We really just say, hey, here's your brain, check it out. Here's a bunch of ways your brain is built. Isn't it cool? You didn't know you could see all these things about your brain. Are any of these things you want to, exercise or change? So, if we're working with like a nonverbal autistic kid or something, it's more about their parents, where are the goals? Where's the suffering? What would success look like? And at the parent level, people often just want to know that we've worked with complaints like their kid, which is, pretty common when you have a lot of kid suffering. You have several flavors, if you will, of kid suffering that shows up. So those of us that work with kids see a lot of the same things again and again. But with like a teenager who's going to show up and maybe have buy-in or maybe not, you can do all that before they get to the commitment to neurofeedback. You can literally do it over their brain map. Show an ADHD kid or an anxious kid or someone with some social loading or some sensory irritability. You show them their brain and you validate their experience and say, oh, look at that. Your brain's doing this. That's interesting. And if it's annoying, that's frustrating. Oh, sorry, you're dealing with that. But look at that. You can see it. Isn't it cool? You can see your rumination. You can see your tick right there. Isn't that cool? You can see your ADHD. Huh. And just right then, without even doing neurofeedback, we end up with this transformation. You know, on podcasts, I've mentioned once or twice that I've gotten a story here. I got an email yesterday from a dad who said, hey, just had to tell you, since you had that QEEG meeting with my daughter, I don't know, she's 18, 19-year-old daughter, a couple weeks ago, it's like everything changed. She started studying. She started organizing her time. She started focusing on college and how to prepare for it. Like, you know, just seeing her brain gave her the permission to start working with her brain. And, you know, your suffering's not instantly different, but it's instantly harder to be overwhelmed by anxiety, ADHD, sleep issues, whatever. If you see it as physiology, as a bit mechanical, it gives you another mode to start, you know, being gentle with yourself and working through resources instead of having a diagnosis happen to you. So that piece of it actually is really powerful with teens who feel disempowered, overwhelmed, frustrated. So that's my sneaky trick is I just provide massive agency through education, and people want to do stuff. Even teenagers generally.
Radar is trying to turn neurofeedback into the next online health trend.
You're preaching to the choir here, I think.
Make a number.
That's right. That's right.
What do you think is going to have to happen? There's a couple more Netflix series need to come out, or a couple more sports figures need to come out. What do you think?
I think the complexity of the process will have to be reduced. There's a lot of people on the fringes of neurofeedback that are geeking out around computational optimization in neurofeedback, doing AI work, doing database driven stuff. And it's super early stages, but I'm seeing people create rather compelling analyses, rather compelling training plans using computational methods and not just individuals with deep skill doing it. And so I think that's going to accelerate. And I think that within 2 or 3 years, we're going to have the ability, I may have talked to you about this before, Pete, but I think we'll have the ability to have a mathematical model of our brain, of our wellness, of our sleep, of our addiction, of our mood in silico. And we'll be able to do things where we can sort of model the impacts of interventions on ourselves before the intervention happens, and massively, narrow down the types of things that will be useful for our brain and our body, and then provide tailored neurofeedback without people like me in the mix. So I think my role in this world as educator is going to go away once we understand the brain better and can get the software, learning a little bit about that stuff.
I think we need that Tony guy from Apple to come over and design this product, because I think we've had decades of neurofeedback being marketed and created by engineers, and engineers love to use it, but anybody else, they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, definitely the current tools are still cutting edge, late 1980s or something. Like, they're still not really wonderful, most of them. I mean, Eager is not the sexiest software, but I stick with it because it gets out of my way. It's kind of a Swiss Army knife. It has all the tools I use. But there's I had somebody complaining a couple of days ago, like, oh, I can't, working through a bug or two or some setup issues with like 60 hertz noise because the wire wasn't on properly. We scaled the software wrong or something. And he's like getting frustrated. And yeah, it's a little frustrating, but there's not a lot of pressure in the field to iterate the same way you would if we were Apple. Apple's would throw a lot of money at this and have really nice software very quickly, because the software is not that complicated. Somebody with $10 million could own the software landscape if they decided to that they wanted to own that 15,000 install base. There's not that much. We're a little niche, little tiny niche of providers and a bunch of prosumers doing stuff. That's kind of it. So that's the problem, Radar. We have to go viral on Substack, as you say, or Twitter. Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we do that?
We
what viral is? Putting up.
Yeah, I don't know. We have to get me in front of big names. When I was on Joe Rogan, I got calls for the next 2 months from providers saying, "Hey, thanks. Thanks. I just got a big rush of business." So, and I did too. It was a pretty big, large impact. For the next couple of months, we got dozens of people coming in.
We got to get you back on with Joe. How'd you get in there?
I forget how we get it initially. Just asking, I think, but I'm not sure that he's my biggest fan. So I don't think I'll be back.
Why? What happened?
I don't know. It's one of those conversations where the end of it wasn't as good as the beginning.
Come on! I get those every day.
Right? I know. But no,
Well, I mean,
we just need to evangelize. People just need to know that you can look at your brain, understand yourself, make changes. People don't know that you can do this stuff. They don't know that you can look at your executive function or your stress response or your speed of processing, and you can see it. So QEEG, I think honestly, is too complicated, too messy, too expensive. When that gets, that piece of it still has room to come down. The neurofeedback software as an industry, because it's nichey, it's kind of locked up in its current form. It will go through evolutionary changes. We'll end up with very inexpensive, very high quality software, 5 years, 10 years. That's coming because software development is changing rapidly. So somebody who's not in the neurofeedback space will just swoop in and do it if the current providers don't get better UX UI, run them, on smaller hardware, et cetera. So that's software's coming, but QEEG, rapid data acquisition, rapid processing, cleaning, that's actually kind of a hard process, looking at data. And when that gets less expensive, when you can send somebody $200 device, passively read it, good to go, and it's not several $1,000s of outlay, several hours of time, when that piece of it drops, I think that the current landscape will explode.
doesn't it? But look what the software companies do. Look at Salesforce. Look at AI. They go to the golf courses, and maybe people won't use neurofeedback to make their lives better, but they will spend a gazillion to drive their score down a point.
Yeah.
Why can't we get somebody into the golf courses? Or nobody's got money?
I mean, there are people who focus on golf as a primary business in neurofeedback. There's several athletic neurofeedback focused people. We have one at Peak Brain over in our UK office. It's doing a lot of athletic focused work, but there's also individual products. I mean, John Cowan, the play attention guy, he developed a version like an OEM repackaged version of the Wiz, and before the Wiz, the Peanut or the Pendant or something, and it was built into a golf visor, and it had audio feedback for like dropping into the zone. So when EMG dropped and SMR climbed up, so you would square up on the tee and then deeply relax, and you get an audio pitch climbing. And so for years, he had a whole business line that was just focused on following, and there was a laptop nearby too on Bluetooth. So it was follow golfers around with a laptop, and you'd hear some audio happening. So,
but if you have a simulator in your basement, why wouldn't you have
It's true,
right?
Yeah, and there's places like I live here in LA. There's places in West LA where it's like a little room that's a little fake, golf course for teaching people to swing. So you could put it right in there. Absolutely. Yeah. I should partner with golf education or golf. What's the term? I'm not a golf guy.
I don't know. Last place you'll ever find me, doctor, is on the golf course.
I can
but
see
no, we should get them on one of the podcasts.
I can see you rocking a pair of those plaid.
Oh yeah.
Ones that stop at the knickers. That's right. That's right.
No, but I think that's a great idea. We should get somebody on one of the shows to talk about golf, because what's it, Brian? Man, I'm gonna butcher his last name. Beauchamp. He's a big proponent. We had
there's been individual sports athletes that have been talking about neurofeedback with that Netflix thing. I have a hockey player named Connor Carrick who got kicked out. He got kind of injured out of the league he was in, and did a bunch of rehab in the minors and worked with us. And he would train his brain on the bus between, scrimmages and practices and things, and worked himself back into top form. And he got signed by the Oilers last year, and he's been kicking butt. So, individual athletes are often like, neurofeedback, everyone should do it. But sometimes athletes, until they become major stars, don't have the most impact necessarily as a voice. So
Kirk Cousins, I mean, he busted out there. He was on Netflix, and then, I forgot the name of the company that was sponsoring, the headband, but it wasn't even neurofeedback. It was an HRV device.
Was it HRV or was it HEG? I forgot what it was.
I think it was HRV, just breathing. That's what they were marketing.
Yeah,
the biofeedback end of it. But Kirk Cousins would use neurofeedback, but the company that was promoting them, that was HRV. I mean, however you started to get it going, I just can't believe. Is there a higher revenue per year in copper bracelets or neurofeedback?
Probably copper bracelets in terms of the margin. Yeah. Yeah.
We're in the wrong business, Doc.
I know. So here's the thing though, like right now I use a few $1,000s of gear for each person. I use, a few $1,000s of assessment equipment. We do have some devices starting to come out there that do things like real-time QEEGs, and they do HRV and PBM, things like Divergence Neuro's headset, for instance. And there's been some plays like the Sense AI, which is trying to do something where it's sort of semi-canned. But I don't think these devices yet have solved these problems. And in the case of like Divergence Neuro and some of the other devices out there, the iSync Wave, some of these devices are really, really expensive still. So while they're starting to solve a problem, there's still our field is still so early in some ways that there's not market pressure, economics of scale to take a device down to prosumer cost. So I think we've been trapped, and this is what I've been seeing for 20 years. We do have some really interesting devices that pop up, get used by some people, and then drop away. And like, there's all kinds of really interesting devices out there that no one knows about. MagStim devices and interesting, the Roshi 2 I'm thinking of, we had a MagStim and a LightStim and an EEG all doing feedback at the same time. Really interesting stuff. But the field has no market pressure. So, what's Jay say, how do you make a small fortune in neurofeedback?
Start with a large one.
Start with a large one. Exactly. So it's so niche-y that, we're going to need someone like, a top level influencer to make neurofeedback sexy against the current model and then have huge adoption, or we're going to have to evolve into the place where the software, the hardware, and the supervision become a lot more accessible. And it's not a couple $1,000s a month to do it, which is what, I charge a couple $1,000s to get started. Basically, it's a really big barrier for many people. So it's kind of a hard thing to start into the, and like you said at the beginning of the talk today, the show today, you have to get some buy-in because people don't feel neurofeedback. You don't get change immediately. You don't feel it like a drug. Sometimes you can feel quickly. So you're 2 weeks in, 2.5 weeks in, 3 weeks in, and there starts to be these little effects. And so I just set expectations that way. And let people know that, it takes a minute. It's like working out, builds up. So it's hard though. You're definitely putting your thumb on some things we haven't yet solved in the field. And I got to tell you, it's a little frustrating because I get asked by clients routinely, at least once a month, someone asked me, the context is, okay, oh my God, I feel amazing. What is going on? I feel really, really good. Oh my gosh, look at my attention test scores. Oh my gosh, look at my brain maps. My wife likes it. I feel really good. What is going on? And why isn't everyone else doing this? Why doesn't everyone know about this? That question, not everyone, but I get that question a lot. And the answer is, well, it's a little complicated to do. It's a little expensive. It's a process. It takes a little bit of skill, a little bit of knowledge, and all that can conspire to keep the barriers to entry a little high. But I think many of those things, the costs and the complexity, I think will come down in technology.
We just need one of the Kardashians to go around with an iMedicine helmet and whatever EEG or
something. Yeah.
I
mean, I did a EEG on Tyler Henry, the Hollywood medium, on Dr. Drew's show, or actually vice versa. Dr. Drew and I went into Tyler's show, and we did a play-by-play while Tyler was doing his psychic reading thing on Steve-O, and we got a whole bunch of people coming in over the next year or so that were like psychic affiliated, people that were interested in that end of the pool, and had sort of like were followers of Tyler, or other psychics who were like, oh, that was cool. Can you look at mine now? And that's how I got to look at several people doing, unusual experience work in their EEGs because they saw that one show. So, I mean, I find that people don't know that it exists. And if you explain relatively simply what it is, they always understand, and then they always want it. So
it's almost like you got to market it as something else besides mental health. And then the side effect is it helps your mental health,
Yeah, well, it's really closer to personal training and how it's done. It's agency you take through assessments, and that's iterative change you make with feedback subjectively. Generally, not every form is like this. Some forms are self-driven or canned or one size fits all. And in some clinical models, the provider does all the decision making. But the process itself is one that's iterative, progressive, relies on your feedback, goes after your goals, and is not as tightly tied to the diagnostic landscape or the fixing diagnoses perspective than you might think. And so I just, again, teach people their brains, and that gives them all the agency. And I find that I have a pretty good, follow through and compliance with things like training and reporting and talking about goals. And it goes up when you teach people about the process and about themselves. When you tell them why things are happening, their behavior changes faster than just telling them something to do. So, that's how I bring in the expectation piece that Radar mentioned, is not in the game. It's in like ownership of the whole process, setting your goals, what'd you notice afterwards, and let's rinse and repeat.
Anthony, I gave you the link, buddy.
Hi, Anthony, from other side of the screen.
AR, outside looking in. I think the variance in phenotypes is why none of the all-in-one devices take off.
Yeah, that you can have the same phenotype with different meaning. You can have different versions of of the same phenotype. Absolutely, and it is hard to spot. I think it's very, very astute, Anthony. I saw somebody post recently on one of the Reddit. We every day somebody posts hey, explain my brain map kind of post on Reddit. And in spite of me saying, hey, no, please post some actual data and enough pages and some raw, get these short little 1-page ones every so often. And one popped up, it was full of noise and it was obvious. But even through that noise, I'm like, okay, this person's got sleep maintenance issues, some brain fog. So once you've looked at thousands of brain maps, even if it's noisy data, you get kind of good at it, as long as you have the raw data to fall back on to know if you're actually looking at real stuff. So the phenotypes are subtle, but I have to believe, Anthony, that we're going to get to the place where machine learning algorithms can get them as well or better than people like Jay or me, who, I'm being lofty, putting myself in Jay's category of looking at brains. But I've looked at a lot for, a quarter century. So I'm going to give myself some props.
For a youngster.
Right. For a youngster, I've looked at a lot of EEGs. And I don't think that's going to matter as much. I mean, I've got, so many EEGs and so much learning and review, but that could easily be replicated in a semi-intelligent landscape, not even modern AI, just machine learning, doing pattern matching, and not even on the maps necessarily, but on the wavelets, the waveforms, on the distributions. A more modern version of QEEG would decompose the raw into the values essentially, right, and interpret them as that happened, not get to pictures and then work backwards, which is often.
You brought up machine learning. Have you gotten into DeepSeek at all?
I've not tried DeepSeek yet.
I've gotten into it. I kind of have my my group. I have my GPT, I have my DeepSeek, and I have my Grok. And kind of what I do is, I don't know if you see it on the social media side, that gets some people in ire. I take a hot topic and I say, ChatGPT, you got this side, you got that side, and let one of them adjudicate, so you can see the process. The thing I like about DeepSeek is it goes down the critical thinking process of what they're considering as it comes out.
I think you can turn that on now, and it's a thing that GPT was hiding because they were afraid that if they exposed that other models would learn off of them and create versions. And it turns out that it doesn't matter if you hide it, you can still distill the model, which is probably what DeepSeek did. That's why it was only $6 million, because they probably distilled the logic by talking to ChatGPT. There's some evidence that there was an article about how there was this massive API access from China into ChatGPT, doing huge amounts of question and answer to look for the logic chain, probably. So
Doc, I'm getting way ahead of my skis here. Okay, so you got to catch me with the butterfly net, but you can write script. This is stuff you probably already know, but I'm just looking at it for the first time. You can write your script that says, I want to do this. I want to, whatever menial task that you're doing, somehow you can automate it, whatever it is. But then you have two other advisors that you can go to figure out if it's right or not, or to see where the flaw is in the script.
Yeah, reinforcement learning. The big difference is the reinforcement learning is coming in now. So we had, predictive algorithms up until now. All of the large language models are just predictive models. You put in input, you get an output. but they were very, very bad at tuning the output in real time at test time or at inference time. And a lot of what's being done right now is to put working memory, to put a reflective period before answering, and then to have reinforcement learning built in to tune the model's ability to get the answer. And that is something that DeepSeek seems to have done better than ChatGPT, was build in the reflection at answer time process. And that's probably going to keep going. We're probably going to see all of this now, fairly accelerating. So,
well, and way cheaper. Way cheaper.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's sort of a paradox, right? It went cheaper, but what that means is we'll just use the same technology now. We'll use the same money, but we'll just do a lot more with it, right? Like, it's not, we're not going to, if it's 5% of the cost, and GPT, OpenAI sees this and goes, oh, okay, this style of doing it is 5% of the cost. Now they're going to implement the same thing because DeepSeek's open source, implement the same shortcuts. And then they're going to do 20 times as much computation for the same money they're already spending, the same resources and power and cooling they're already using. So it's just going to allow a faster growth, is my take on that. And here's the thing, DeepSeek's kind of interesting. I don't know if you saw the article yesterday, day before. Somebody sat down with DeepSeek R1 and challenged it to find ways to improve its speed. And it went out and did a bunch of things and came back and had doubled its speed, literally doubled its speed of processing. Without any programming, just an AI developer saying, okay, I think you should be able to figure out a way to run twice as fast or run faster. So.
Hey, Radar, I'm not a neurofeedback practitioner. I started with a large fortune and got to a small fortune. And I said, here I am on, doing the podcast. My sister was a neuropsychologist and she found out she was making more money on the talk therapy. And, we did it for, 2 or 3 years. We're in the Midwest, and I'm sticking with the podcast, and she's doing the talk therapy. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And that was funny.
I know a lot of talk therapists that move into neurofeedback because they get tired of sitting in a room, having one person come in and come out every day, and only having limited contact and going through 30 hours of that every week. Instead, they want to have a nice little busy office with a couple of stations and people coming and going. And, it can be really boring and really kind of isolating to be a talk therapist in private practice. And so I know a few people that have expanded just because it means they have a nice, multi-activity office. And so it gets things really, more culturally, rich there. So
Doc, I don't want to get too much in the weeds. It's only you and I, so we can really get into it.
Oh no. No one to stop us. Okay.
Nobody to stop us. But isn't this machine learning, isn't it all about an image and looking where text is or a question is asked? It all comes down to being like a picture, right?
Yeah, pattern matching,
pattern match, yeah,
pattern identification. You can do all kinds of different machine learning. When I worked at McLean Hospital for a year, and I was working for Dr. Mike Henry, who ran the ECT center and did a lot of other work with depression. He was running some studies looking at what happened when somebody withdrew from their medication, because people come in and say, look, I don't want to be on my antidepressants anymore. And they would withdraw, and we would scan them in an MRI several times over a few months. And I built a machine learning algorithm in the software SPM to follow the edge of the structures and trace itself and stay on the edge, so that I didn't have to sit there and for the first several thousand hours, I sat there 100 hours and trace by hand the caudate, the putamen, et cetera. But after a while, I learned to do a bit of scripting and created a machine learning algorithm to trace the edges of structures based on the light gray values that it was seeing in the picture. So yeah, you could sort of give it feedback and get better by, telling it what it was doing right or wrong. And these days, modern things, if you can define what the answer is, what the right or wrong is, then you can kind of give it infinite ability to learn and self-reflect. And this is how things are like DeepSeek. We're able to go, oh yeah, I can be twice as fast. Boom. Now the code's twice as fast. So
where I'm going with it on the image part of things, I mean, that's raw EEG, right? You have to be able to read it with a machine.
Yeah, that's really wavelet analysis, right? The shape of the waveform within a certain amount of variance. And yeah, there are some initial visual scan EEG systems. Lisa Tatarin was reading in raw EEG into ChatGPT. She built a custom ChatGPT, which has her 20 article database of things she uses for analysis, and the MATLAB EEG lab manual of all the things it can do, and then her pre-processed files that she does out of MATLAB, and she takes those and runs them through ChatGPT, and it does a signal analysis. It takes EDF files and .mat files. So we're not even talking PDFs anymore. We're talking EEG files, binary files. It takes those and says, okay, there's some alpha slowing here. Okay, this area has some of that there, on machine learning in this case. And that's not just predictive outcomes. Now we're doing the ability to reference resources in other contexts. So essentially have a working knowledge base that is then brought back in. I'm working on that myself now for a tool, not to do the work, but to summarize what I've done. Because I'm not convinced that, like Anthony said, those phenotypes are pretty subtle sometimes. I'm not convinced that the AI is going to be good at brain mapping reviews for a while. But I am convinced they can take a 30-minute video of me identifying all those things and talking to somebody about goals and brain mapping and what it means, and distill that out into a much more regular explanation for somebody to then digest later. So,
well, to put a bow on it, I think that the three options that you have that you can use, GPT, DeepSeek, and Grok, and then with Raspberry Pi, these computers are getting so small. I have to think that you could at least can't you just measure one spot to get the signal off of brain by using that?
For you mean as a proxy for QEEG?
Yeah.
You could. What you'll need is more of a wild type database. The QEEG landscape, to make the predictions we make, we have to control a lot of variability. And a single electrode has too much variability to judge unless you have a huge amount of context. So this is why you can do things like 2-channel Z-score training at a location in software. You don't require a full head or Loretta analysis to do Z-score training. You can do it at a location using a Z-score DLL or something from BrainMaster, let's say. But to really do signal discriminants, let's say, to really see signals across other signals, you need more than one electrode. You really need multiple electrodes. So things like coherence and phase, for instance, you're never going to get if you only have a couple of electrodes. This sort of gets back to the idea. There are some things in our field that use language that sounds an awful lot like QEEG, and it's not, because they're using like 3 or 4 electrodes in the front of the head, or they have sequential pairs they move to do 1 minute of recording or 2 minutes of recording at a time. And those things also rapidly lose most of the utility of QEEG, because they're not getting the intra-electrode simultaneous measurements of patterns that are existing. So I think we're going to be constrained for a while of needing more than a couple of electrodes to do assessments. But I do think that someone's going to come up with like a good dry system finally, or a good zero contact system finally at some point. So I expect we'll have a few technological breakthroughs as well that are not about neurofeedback, but it might be about like material science or electronics, and then we'll end up with a Raspberry Pi or a phone app that can do neurofeedback in a sophisticated way that's as good as the clinical tools. But that's a much shorter jump to get to than having the tools that'll sort of assess without the QEEG being fully gathered, I think.
I guess what I'm hoping for is if you can get somebody hooked on just getting 1 point and showing you have control of CZ, right?
Yeah.
I forgot what the protocol is, but that's the one that my sister would always go to. Somebody had go to CZ and put it on the top of the head, and then see what the outcome is. If somebody gets started on that with a Raspberry Pi, and you're talking about a couple $100 out of the pocket, I know that's less than. I mean, you want subscriptions?
Yeah, but you're going to cause trouble.
Yeah,
you're going to cause harm. Someone 2/3 of people, that's fine for. Or C4SMR, 2/3 of people, 3/4, that's fine for. But like that last portion will have abreactions. And looking at a whole brain map will tell you what to work around, what not to do, how to where you should start, perhaps. So it's a little. I think it's a little irresponsible to train blind. I really do think we need a full picture as much as we can get these days, which, you know, it's 10 minutes to 15 minutes of a cap on your head. Put a cap on your head, squirt it full of gel, sit still. That's it. Like, come on. Like, you know, people complain about messy hair, but I don't want to hear it. Get the brain map. Know thyself. It's worth the messy hair.
And what I'm saying is, with these cheap things, can you just put the one spot and come up with your own quasi
Yeah,
scan?
I mean, maybe eventually, because remember, part of the thing about EEG is you have to have the same montage to judge the same EEG. So you're going to need to be able to map reduced density electrodes into a larger density space, which is going to be hard to do. One won't do it. A few might do it. There's a company out there making something, and I'm not sure I buy the technological. I'm not sure if they pulled it off or if it's vaporware, but it's an in-ear device that has several electrodes around the edge of the ear. Like it's like a hearing aid style, you know, or audiophile earbud kind of musician, you know, active earbud kind of thing you put in. It has a few little contact points around the edge. And supposedly they are doing a Loretta-like process to visualize where EEG is elsewhere. Now, I don't know if it's working yet, but you know, and I would normally think, you know, based on what I know about Loretta and source localization, EEG, and what happens as you get out in the ears themselves, I would normally be like, probably not. Except that several years ago, when Apple released the whatever their headphone is called, the AirPod.
Oh, the AirPods, yeah.
Yeah, when they released the second version of the Pro, initially in the patent, there was all this language around biosensors embedded in the device picking up EEG. So I think that it may be possible technologically, but I think there's a use case implementation. Like, you know, you can't just have an electric car, you got to have all this infrastructure, and you can't just have an EEG, you got to have referential databases and analyses and QEEGs transformed. And it's a whole landscape that you have to match the way you're measuring. And so I think that piece of it might be solved first. Someone might come up with like a really low density, you know, you pair of glasses you put on, it measures all down the side of the head and behind the ears, and somehow ends up with like a nice spatial visualization of stuff that's really kind of far away through the combination of lag and instantaneous EEG, which is what Loretta is. I think that might be possible, but I don't think we're there yet, is my big takeaway. So soon, you know, maybe next year.
All right, last question, and we'll shut the kitchen down, Doc. Speaking of Lisa, I think she trains people with Parkinson's. Isn't 0102 used for people with PD? What's the benefit of that?
She trains Parkinson's. Yeah, Lisa's like the global Parkinson's expert. Lisa Tatterin, Tatyrn. She's like, if you're interested in Parkinson's and neurofeedback, you should talk to Lisa. She's been funded by the Michael J. Fox Foundation. She's in lots of interesting pilot studies and research. I don't know about 0102 radar. I think 0102 could be used for Parkinsonian complaints. If you're using 01-02,
except for the cerebellum.
Nah, you're really in the visual tissue. I mean, you might be getting some cerebellar signal, but not much, because most of the EEG in the cerebellum points the wrong direction, and you can't measure it from outside the head. So, but what you might have is beta hypercoherence across the back of the head. In various degenerative diseases, headaches, you know, various neuro things, you'll have beta hypercoherence across the back of the head, and that would break it up if you reward low beta or something, and that with a difference montage like that, you would definitely, you know, break up some of the beta. I find that I get my most strong impacts in Parkinsonian complaints using SMR categories, and I've seen several times classic SMR training, usually a mix of C4 and CZ. Making medication work dramatically better, where somebody with PD doesn't have to wake up in the middle of the night to take more meds and go back to sleep because they were tremoring, where the meds now work all night long. Or someone who's young with a Parkinsonian phenomena, it seems to like slow down and stop progressing. And I've seen the most impact on, not on tremor, but on the rigidity, the stiffness, the woodedness in face, the micrographia. These are all the negative symptoms of PD, the reduction of tone. Those seem to respond a little bit better. And then the dopaminergics, the medication gets more sensitized. Like I said, the same way it would if you were taking Adderall and you did neurofeedback, you would get a stronger Adderall effect. So I don't know if Lisa's using 0102. I find that I don't usually need 0102 and stick to SMR style training. Now, again, dialed off their brain map, and you can usually see issues in theta beta tones in the C sites in the central strip on a QEEG when there's Parkinsonian complaints. So, look at the QEEG. That's my short answer.
Okay, good. Haida, Radar, thanks for showing up again. Everybody else, Tony for popping in. Jay, I know you're floating around somewhere out there, rusting up for tomorrow morning. Andrew Hill, for the people out there that want to get an at-home EEG, what do they do?
Yeah, so of course you can come see us in our physical offices, which are New York City, LA, Costa Mesa, St. Louis, London, Stockholm, Nova Scotia, or you can do remote work. And in the US, you can borrow equipment remotely. Coaches walk you through it. So come check us out at peakbraininstitute.com. You can see all the locations when you're there, or check me out on socials at Peak Brain LA or YouTube at Dr. Hill, DRHILL, and come hang out on my live stream on Monday nights and ask questions.
Yeah. If you don't like to cook in here, you can go Monday.
Well, I don't just go to one restaurant or one takeout place. I don't know about you.
Dr. Hill, man, thank you so much for showing up. Awesome time.
Nice to see you, and nice to see everyone. Thanks for your contributions tonight.
Hey, and keep that garden hose going out there.
It's coming, coming from the sky. I put the order in. It's working. It's all right. We'll take it.
All right, Doc. Bye-bye.
All right, see ya.